I heard the crack before I understood what it was. It wasn't loud. That's the thing nobody tells you about the worst moments of your life. They don't arrive with sirens. They arrive quiet. A dull, wet sound from the bottom of the stairwell. And then nothing. And then my son's name tearing out of my throat before I even knew I was running. My boy was 12 years old. His name is Trevor. He plays baseball. He has a gap between his front teeth that his mother always said made him look like a little rascal. And she wasn't wrong. He was the kind of kid who still hugged me in public, still grabbed my hand crossing parking lots, even though he was old enough to know better. Old enough that other kids might see. He didn't care. That was Trevor. He was on the floor at the bottom of the stairwell inside Alderton Preparatory Academy, and he was not moving. I need to back up. I need to explain how we got there, because if I don't, none of the rest of this makes sense. And if none of it makes sense, then maybe you'd think I went too far. I want you to understand that I didn't. I want you to understand that I didn't go far enough. I spent 11 years in the Army. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, 75th Ranger Regiment out of Fort Benning. By the time I got out, I was 31 years old, and I had been responsible for the lives of men in conditions that would make most people's hands shake just hearing about it. I came home. I met a woman named Sylvia at a mutual friend's cookout in Fayetteville. She laughed at something I said. I don't even remember what. And I thought, that's it. That's the sound I want to hear every day for the rest of my life. We had Trevor 2 years later. She died when he was 4. Ovarian cancer. 11 months from diagnosis to funeral. I won't talk about that part. Some things aren't for other people. I'll just say that after she was gone, Trevor was the only reason I knew what direction was forward. He still is. I left active duty and took a job as a senior security analyst for a defense contractor outside of Arlington, Virginia. Cyber threat assessment, infrastructure vulnerability, that kind of work. The pay was good. Not rich, but good. Solid. I bought a house in a decent neighborhood in McLean. I put a little away every month. I coached Trevor's Little League team on weekends. I thought I was doing okay. When Trevor tested into Alderton Prep on a partial academic scholarship, I thought we'd made it to the next level. That school had a 98% college acceptance rate. Former senators' kids had walked those halls. I stretched the budget to cover the tuition gap, cut back on things that didn't matter because Trevor mattered. That school mattered. His future mattered. I should have paid more attention to who else walked those halls. I got the call at 2:47 on a Tuesday afternoon. Trevor's assistant principal. She told me there had been an incident on the interior stairwell near the east wing. She told me Trevor had fallen. She used that word, fallen, like gravity was responsible. By the time I got to the school, the paramedics were already there. Trevor was on a backboard. He was conscious but couldn't feel his left leg. They were talking about his L1 vertebra. I held his hand and I talked to him in the calm voice I used in combat, the one that says, everything is fine even when nothing is, and I did not let myself fall apart in front of him. In the ER, while they were running imaging, a nurse handed me a plastic bag with Trevor's belongings, his sneakers, his phone, his torn jacket, and folded inside the jacket pocket a note on thick cream-colored paper, the kind with a watermark. It said, "Next time, walk away when you're told." No signature, but the handwriting was careful, practiced. The paper had a monogram at the top, the initials WHB. I put the note in my back pocket. I did not show it to anyone in that hospital. I sat next to my son while they told me he had a compression fracture and that there was some nerve involvement and that they wouldn't know the full prognosis for at least 72 hours. And I held his hand, and I was very still. Trevor told me what happened. He told me in pieces because it hurt to talk, because he was scared, because he was 12 and he had just realized the world was not the way he thought it was. There were 3 boys. He knew their names. Weston Brigham. That was the WHB on the note. Son of Harrison Brigham, founder of Brigham Capital Group, one of the largest private equity firms on the East Coast. The second boy was named Fletcher, son of Douglas Alderton III, whose family name was literally on the building. The third one, a follower, a hanger-on. Trevor didn't even know his last name, just called him Cole. They had told Trevor to stop sitting with a girl named Amara at lunch. Amara was on scholarship too. They had been telling him this for 3 weeks. Trevor had ignored them there for 3 weeks. Trevor had ignored them. On Tuesday, Weston had followed him to the east stairwell after 6th period, and the three of them had surrounded him on the landing. And when Trevor tried to push past, one of them, Trevor didn't see which one, hit him from behind and he went down the stairs. 14 steps. I counted them later. I went to the school the next morning. I was calm. I am good at calm. I brought the note in a sealed plastic bag and I sat down across from the headmaster, a man named Dr. Term Fairfield, in his wood-paneled office with its framed photos of alumni who'd gone on to Congress. And I told him what Trevor had told me, and I placed the note on his desk. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at me. He said he would need to conduct an investigation. He said these were serious allegations against students from long-standing families in the Alderton community. He said he was sure there was more to the story. He said Trevor had been struggling socially and that perhaps there had been some mutual conflict. He said I should let the school handle it internally. I picked up the note. I put it back in my pocket. I thanked him for his time. In the parking lot, I sat in my truck for 4 minutes. I counted those too. Then I drove to the McLean Police Department and filed a report. The detective assigned to it called me back 3 days later to let me know that without video evidence of the incident, the stairwell camera had been, quote, malfunctioning, and given the conflicting accounts from witnesses, they were not going to pursue charges. He told me it might be worth consulting a civil attorney. He said it in the voice of a man who already knew what the outcome would be. I hung up. I looked at the ceiling of my home office for a while. There is a water stain up there, shaped vaguely like the state of Texas. I stared at it. Then I opened my laptop and I got to work. The thing about working in cyber threat assessment for 11 years is that you understand something most people don't. Information is not private. Information is just stored. And everything that is stored can be found by someone who knows where to look and has enough patience. I'm not talking about hacking. I'm not talking about anything illegal. I am talking about the extraordinary amount of information that wealthy, arrogant people leave in public view because they are so certain of their own untouchability that it never occurs to them to be careful. Harrison Brigham was not careful. It took me a week of evenings after Trevor went to sleep. Public filings, SEC disclosures, court records from 3 states, a 2019 arbitration case he'd settled quietly that showed up in a Delaware business registry if you knew the case number format, a pattern of shell company transfers that was technically legal but would look, to the right journalist, like exactly what it was. I also found something else. Something I hadn't been looking for. Weston Brigham was not Harrison's only problem child. There had been an incident at their previous school. Weston's expulsion from Cheswick Academy in Connecticut, quietly sealed, quietly papered over with a substantial donation to the Cheswick Endowment. And before that, a complaint filed by another family, withdrawn after what public records described as a private resolution. A pattern. Document. Sealed, but not invisible. Not to me. I wrote everything up in a clean document. 43 pages. I then spent a Saturday afternoon researching every financial journalist who had covered private equity in the last 5 years. I found one at the Washington Post who had written 3 pieces on leveraged buyout firms obscuring liability through subsidiary structuring. Her name was Rebecca Thorne. She had won a regional press award in 2022. She answered investigative tip emails within 24 hours. I sent her 43 pages and the scanned note with the monogram. Then I called an attorney, not a civil attorney, a criminal one, a former federal prosecutor named Allen who I'd met once at a security conference, who had since gone private, and who, when I explained the situation, said, and I'm quoting, "Send me everything. Do not touch anything else. Let me work." Trevor came home from the hospital after 4 days. He could feel his leg again. The nerve involvement was temporary, the doctor said. Thank God. But he had a back brace and physical therapy 3 times a week, and he couldn't play baseball for at least 3 months. He sat on the couch the first night, and I ordered his favorite, pepperjack burgers from the place on Cambridge Road. And we watched baseball highlights on TV. And I did not tell him anything I was doing. I told him things were being handled. I told him justice was slow, but it was real. He looked at me with those eyes, Sylvia's eyes, dark brown, serious when they needed to be serious. And he said, "Dad, they're not going to do anything. Their families own everything." I said, "They don't own me." He didn't say anything back, but he nodded, just once, the way he nods when he believes something. I was not going to let that boy down. Rebecca Thorne called me 8 days after I sent the email. She had questions. Specific, smart questions. She had already independently verified 4 of the items in my document. She said she needed another 2 weeks. She asked if I would be willing to be quoted on record as the source. I said yes. The same week, Alan filed a civil complaint against Alderton Prep, Harrison Brigham individually, and Douglas Alderton III's family trust for negligence, failure to supervise, and civil assault. He filed for expedited discovery, which meant Alderton Prep had to start producing records, including, critically, all documentation of prior disciplinary incidents involving Weston Brigham and Fletcher Alderton. The headmaster's office called me the day after the filing. Dr. Fairfield's assistant. She asked if I might be available for a meeting. I said I'd check my calendar. I called Alan. He said, "Do not meet with them without me." So we didn't. Harrison Brigham's personal attorney called Alan 3 days later with an offer. A settlement. Non-disclosure agreement required. The number had 5 zeros. Alan called me and told me the number. I said no. Alan said, "I want to make sure you heard me correctly." I said, "I heard you. No." He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "Okay, good. I was hoping you'd say that." The Post article ran on a Thursday. I was at my desk at work when it went live, and my phone started buzzing before I'd finished reading the first paragraph. The headline was, "Careful. Journalists are careful with things like this." But the substance was not. It laid out the pattern. Cheswick Academy. The shell companies. The sealed complaint. The note with a monogram. By that afternoon, Brigham Capital Group's main investor portal had been flooded. By the following Monday, 2 institutional partners, a university endowment and a pension fund, had issued statements saying they were reviewing their positions. Harrison Brigham released a statement through his PR firm saying the allegations were baseless and that he was exploring legal action against the Post. He did not file. His attorney knew better. The civil discovery process was pulling up things that nobody in that school's administration had wanted pulled up. Emails between Dr. Fairfield and Harrison Brigham's office from the week of the incident. Communications in which the phrase "managing the situation" appeared 4 times. One email, sent from Fairfield's personal Gmail, which his attorney had somehow not thought to flag before production. That said, and I am being exact, "The father is military. They tend to let things go when they feel respected. Give him a formal meeting and he'll move on." Alan read that email aloud to me over the phone, and I sat very still for a moment. Then I said, "They thought I would just go away." Alan said, "A lot of people in your position would have." I said, "I know." Fletcher Alderton's family settled first. Douglas Alderton III, whose name was on the building, wrote a check that covered Trevor's medical expenses, 3 years of physical therapy, and a college fund contribution that my attorney described as serious. The Alderton family also agreed to fund an independent review of the school's disciplinary procedures. In exchange, I agreed not to pursue punitive damages against them specifically. I signed that one. Fletcher was a follower. His father was a coward, but not a predator. I could live with that distinction. Harrison Brigham did not settle. He made that decision, I think, because he had always won. He had spent 20 years winning through money and pressure and the attrition that comes from being the most expensive person in any legal dispute. He assumed I would exhaust my resources before he exhausted his. He did not account for Alan's contingency arrangement. He did not account for the fact that I had spent 11 years learning how to sustain pressure under conditions that were supposed to break me. He did not account for the discovery depositions, in which Weston, 17 years old, coached extensively by 4 different attorneys, still could not keep his story straight on the key question of where his hands were when Trevor went down the stairs. The deposition transcript was 22 pages. The contradiction appeared on page 11. Alan read it to me the night we got it. It was 9 p.m. and Trevor was in bed and I was at the kitchen table and I read page 11 twice. Weston said he was at the top of the landing. Then, 6 questions later, he said he was behind Trevor. You cannot be at the top of the landing and behind Trevor simultaneously when Trevor is already on the stairs. It was a small thing. A crack in the wall. Alan put a chisel in it. The criminal referral came from the detective assigned to the original case, the same detective who had called me to say there wasn't enough to proceed. Something had changed his mind. I don't know exactly what. I know that Alan had a conversation with the district attorney's office. I know that the Post article had created a certain amount of pressure that these things sometimes create, and I know that when the school's own records, produced in discovery, showed that the stairwell camera had been manually disabled from a panel in the East Maintenance Corridor at 2:31 p.m., 14 minutes before Trevor went down the stairs, things became considerably harder to explain away. Weston Brigham was charged with felony assault causing serious bodily injury. He was 17. His attorneys argued for juvenile adjudication. The DA's office pushed back. There were 3 hearings on the question of transfer to adult court. I attended all 3. I sat in the gallery and I watched Harrison Brigham across the aisle. Expensive suit. Jaw set. The look of a man who had decided this was just another problem to be managed. And I made sure, every single time our eyes met, that he understood I was not going anywhere. The judge ruled that Weston would be tried as a juvenile, but that the record would be preserved for potential adult consideration pending sentencing. It was not everything. It was not nothing. Alan explained the practical implications for 45 minutes. I understood them. On the day of the disposition hearing, Weston was adjudicated delinquent on the assault charge. He was sentenced to 18 months in a juvenile residential program, 2 years of probation following release, and mandatory restitution. His driver's license was deferred until his 21st birthday. He was removed from Alderton Prep. Harrison Brigham's attorney announced they would appeal. Harrison Brigham's 2 remaining institutional partners announced, the following week, that they were withdrawing from his current fund. I don't know if those things are related. I don't know enough about the private equity world to say. I know that Alan got a call from Brigham's personal attorney 6 weeks after the disposition hearing, and that after that call, Alan came to my house in person, which he had never done before, and sat down at my kitchen table and told me that the appeal had been quietly withdrawn and that Harrison Brigham would like to discuss a civil resolution. We resolved it. The terms are confidential. I will say that Trevor's college education is not something I need to worry about anymore. It's been 7 months since all of this started. Trevor got cleared for baseball in the spring. He's playing again, same Little League team. Different jersey because he's a size up now. I went to his first game back and I sat in the bleachers with the other parents, and I watched him take his first at-bat of the season. And when he hit a line drive into left center, I clapped until my hands hurt. After the game, walking back to the truck, he was eating a snow cone grape already half melted, dripping on his hand, and he said, "Dad, did you know Weston Brigham got sent to juvie?" I said, "I heard something about that." He took another bite of his snow cone and thought about this for a moment. He said, "Good." I said, "Yeah, good." He grabbed my hand crossing the parking lot. He's still young enough for that, still doesn't care who sees it, and I hope that never changes, and I am going to do everything in my power to make sure it doesn't. We drove home with the windows down. It was a warm evening in April. That particular smell of cut grass and car exhaust that means spring in Northern Virginia. And Trevor put his feet up on the dashboard the way I'm always telling him not to, and I didn't say anything about it this time. Some things you let go. Some things you don't. I want to be very clear about which category Weston Brigham fell into. I want to be very clear that I made a decision in a hospital parking lot in McLean, Virginia, sitting in my truck staring at a steering wheel, that I was going to bring every single thing I had, every skill, every contact, every hour of patience I'd built over 11 years of doing hard things in difficult places, and I was going to make sure my son knew that what happened to him was not something the world was just going to shrug at and move on from. He knows that now. That's the whole story. That's all of it. How far would you go? I've thought a lot about what made Harrison Brigham so certain he would win, and I think it came down to one thing. He had never been made to pay for anything. Not once. Not really. Every time there was a consequence coming for him or his son, money arrived first and the consequence dissolved. Cheswick Academy, the family who filed the complaint and then withdrew it, Dr. Fairfield and his careful emails about managing situations. Every single one of those moments taught Harrison the same lesson, that the rules applied to other people, that someone like me, a single father on a defense contractor's salary, was just weather. Something to wait out. What he didn't understand is what 11 years in the Rangers actually builds in a person. It's not toughness exactly. Everyone thinks it's toughness. It's patience. It's the ability to stay calm and keep moving when everything around you is designed to make you quit. I had sat in positions in Afghanistan for 18 hours without moving, waiting for a window. I had watched plans fall apart and rebuilt them on the fly in the dark. The idea that a private equity lawyer and a school headmaster were going to outlast me was, honestly, almost funny. Almost. What I want Trevor to take from this, and what I think about when I watch him play baseball now, when I see him grab my hand in a parking lot without thinking about it, is not that the world is fair. It isn't. The world allowed Weston Brigham to push my 12-year-old son down a flight of stairs and then spend weeks trying to make that fact disappear. That's the world. I'm not going to lie to him about it. What I want him to understand is the difference between the people who accept that unfairness as final and the people who treat it as a problem to be solved. Every skill I had, I used. Not rage, not connections I didn't have, not money I hadn't earned. I used 43 pages of documented facts, an attorney who believed in the case, a journalist who knew how to ask the right questions, and the ability to sit very still in a very uncomfortable situation and keep thinking clearly. That's it. That's all it was. There's something I've come to believe about the way consequences actually work in the world. They're not automatic. They don't arrive on their own. For every Harrison Brigham who eventually loses, there are probably 10 who never do. Because nobody stayed in the fight long enough to make losing inevitable. The difference isn't justice existing in some abstract sense. The difference is someone deciding that the cost of walking away is higher than the cost of staying. I made that decision in a hospital parking lot in McLean, and I would make it again without hesitating. Trevor is going to face hard things I can't protect him from completely, no matter how much I want to. What I can give him is a model, a demonstration lived out in front of him of what it looks like to take a serious hit and not go down, to be patient when patience is unbearable, to use your mind when your hands want to do something else entirely, to know the difference between what feels satisfying in the short term and what actually wins. Weston Brigham is in a juvenile residential program. Harrison Brigham's fund lost 2 institutional partners. Dr. Brigham's fund lost 2 institutional partners. Fairfield's emails are part of a public court record now. None of that happened because the system worked automatically. It happened because I sat down at a kitchen table after my son went to sleep and I got to work. That's the thing about people who are used to winning through power. They don't know what to do with someone who is willing to outwork them. They don't have a plan for that. They never needed one before,